Well, thanks everyone for being here. Whatever part of the space time continuum you currently find yourself engaged in. Now, I can't believe we're already on episode 5 of 5. To be honest, if you had asked me at the start, Prem, can you really fill up 5 weeks in a row about your personal structures using only or mostly the task management software things? I would have been like, no way. We'll be done way before that, and then we can just dance for the rest of the episodes. But I guess I was wrong. Turns out it takes a lot of time to describe one's individual systems. I mean, I bet that if you tried it to list out all or most of the things that structure and organize your life and particular worldview, to really get to the heart of accounting for yourself, it might take a while too. I mean, you might try it. But the good news is, it's episode 5, and although there's way too much to finish today, we have a book, a printed book, my first printed book, which was printed by Office Offset here in Berlin. And, it's already out of date. I mean, because it was printed a month ago. And frankly, these particular systems, they change a lot faster than that. But still, it'll be available very soon at a disreputable, I'm just kidding, sorry, no offense meant, bookseller near you. Or at least the next time you meet me in person, you can always ask if I have a copy for you. And B, the second good thing is that time's just an illusion anyways. I mean, past, present, and future collapse in spaces just like this one. So stick around, find me on other channels, and I'm sure we'll get to finishing structures eventually, somewhere, somehow, somewhen. So enough intro anymore. We've got to get through a lot, and we also have a special guest. So let's just go. I'm going to open up my Things app and the tags function on Things, and here we are. So let's see. This week, we finished activities last time, so now we're on to scales. Let's get to scales. So, okay. So scales, I mean, this is a way I've been recently organizing the things that I'm involved in. And maybe, I think many human or creative activities in the world can be organized along this. I mean, the scales are continuous, or at least they're connected. And in this, I'm inspired, as in many other things, by the writer and thinker Adrienne Murray Brown. Their book, Emergent Strategy, has some parallel thinking. But let's start with gestures. Gestures are small-scale movements and actions that can nevertheless embody a particular ethos and a way in the world, and can scale up. I mean, they can be ephemeral, they can be elegant, and they can be effective. I learned this actually from my design partner, Chris Cheng-Huan Wu. And over a decade ago, we were working on a crazy, crazy exhibition installation in Brussels, one that, required us and our crew to work well beyond what seemed humanly possible. And, on the last day of install, I was getting way too nitpicky about things, trying to ask people to move things by like a centimeter left or right. And Chris just stopped me and said, in his infinite wisdom, he said, Prem, it's not about perfection. It's all about the gesture. I mean, it took me like 10 years to finally realize he was completely right. And I mean, in fact, a gesture can be as small as something like this. I mean, wherever you are, whenever you are, let's just take a moment and ground ourselves. Let's just breathe deeply and breathe out. And again, breathe in deeply and breathe out. And we'll do it one more time. Breathe in deeply and breathe out. Okay, tools. Well, I always talk about tools because I think the point of nearly all human production is to create things that can be meaningful for others to adapt and extend and use for their own means. I mean, I do believe as well that every tool, no matter how neutral it seems, it does have an inherent ideology. But most of the time, I believe that tools can be used for many different ends. Strategies. Strategies are larger scale approaches that gather together gestures and tools with an eye towards a particular intentional outcome. Here's where ideology becomes even more important, but also methodology. And then finally, frameworks. And these are in parentheses for a particular reason. I mean, frameworks represent more completist or comprehensive meta structures that try to encompass or describe many kinds of things. And to be honest, I hesitated to add them here, and that's why they're in parentheses. Because although I do believe in the existence of frameworks, I'm not sure yet if you should ever really articulate them explicitly or try intentionally to realize them. I mean, I guess there's part of me that's suspicious, that thinks that this kind of over-designing, this kind of like totalizing approach, and trying to look at the world in a top-down way, that it's one of the things that's gotten us into a lot of the problems that humankind finds itself today. But I might also be totally wrong, and that's why I've left it in there. Maybe what we actually need to do is to have this kind of constant and continuous movement between these four different scales, from the smallest gesture to the largest framework, to make sure that things actually make sense at all. Okay, so let's open up modes. I mean, this is just an incomplete list of the modes and media in which I operate. Analog, auditory, digital, photographic, spiritual, verbal, and visual. Now, here we have ways, which is another incomplete list, and it's really just the structural or formal tools that I use, that I often find myself using in order to help create meaning and pleasure in the world. Alternation, color, composition, disjunction, hierarchy, integration, intercutting, pacing, sequence, selection, sizing, tempo, withdrawal. Okay. Outputs, this is pretty self-explanatory. I mean, this is just the things that I produce, some of the things that I produce and help to birth into the world. Artworks, books, communities, conversations, documents, events, exhibitions, hunches, images, institutions, lectures, magazines, meetings, panel discussions, performances, photographs, policies, presentations, proposals, protests, talk shows, texts, theories, videos, visual identities, and workshops. Trinity human. So, I mean, I think that too much of so-called Western thinking has focused on the division between these three trinities, these three aspects, the body, mind, and spirit, rather than thinking about them as fundamentally interconnected and interdependent terms. Even if not all technologies, particularly the Western ones, can record or register them all equally. Three tools. So I used to think that you could change the world with some very basic tools. The first one, which I call counting, is online, and I'll put a link to that right in the chat down there. So just look down in the chat and you can find a link to it. The second, commune, and the third, collective, are still in development. And if you're interested, hit me up and I'm happy to tell you more. Or if you're one of those folks who might be able to help support them, just let me know. I'm always ready to have a coffee with somebody. Okay. So, three scales for art. Now, one of my biggest realizations over the past 6 months is that art, in my opinion, is fundamentally about communication, community, and communion with others who are different from each other. And let me just tell you what I mean. I mean, a lot of folks say design is about communication, but I actually found myself saying, no, I think all art, in this broadest sense, in terms of thinking about human creative practice, is about communication. I mean, from the first cave painting onward, I believe that art served to communicate with someone or something else, whether it was another part of oneself, with other people, with animals, with spirits, with gods. And I think that this is really important. It is one of our most important means of being together and communing with each other. Now, within that, I have articulated for myself three scales or ways in which I think that art can be very important today and what its value is. These are individual, collective, and societal. And the first is that I think art is a path towards individual liberation. What I mean here is that over the last 500 years, from the late Middle Ages, early Renaissance in Europe and in the kind of so-called Western world, art making has modeled and prototyped particular tools and pathways towards individual self-knowledge and liberation. Now, the second scale is that art can produce complex aesthetic pleasures that help us to encounter others. And what I mean here is that, I think that art is one very important and powerful human modality for creating rich, complex, and aesthetically pleasurable experiences, which make it easier to encounter ideas and people that might be challenging and discomforting, things that might seem threatening at first, but from which we can learn. And the third scale is that art, in my mind, can be a Trojan horse. It has access to power. And this is also an important historical thing. Over the last 500 years, art has taken a role, moved out of the kind of crafts and the more humble human exercises and activities into having a seat at the same table with folks who have power, people who have economic, social, and political power. And so I think that art can be a Trojan horse. It can help prototype and demonstrate for those who are in power different ways that society can be transformed for the betterment of everyone. So, is that cool? I hope it makes sense. I mean, in some ways, that's really why I'm here today in the first place. Okay, so finally, we're going to jump in right now into my references partial. And these are really like books and films and music that a lot of them are here with me in Berlin, but some of them I could remember from my New York City life, though, this is constantly changing. I mean, and it is literally like this changes almost every day. I mean, hey, this morning I actually received 2 copies of books. I received a copy of Raymond Williams' Keywords and then Keywords for the 21st Century, both of which were recommended to me by Dushko Petrovich. And I haven't read them yet, but let's just say I have a really strong feeling that they will make their way into this listing. I mean, how could I not resist the recursivity of including 2 books of keywords in my own list of personal tags? But anyways, I'll start to read them now. And as I mentioned, my own little book, aptly titled Structures Describing a System in Real Time, which is, the same title as the series, it has at least an older version of this list in it. So if you're interested in picking up some reading, listening, and watching material for those rainy days or lockdown ahead. So and keep in mind, I could probably give an entire lecture on any one of these, or at least riff on them for a while. But since we're short on time, I'm just going to read through them for now, and we'll pick up at a later date and time why I'm inspired by them. Okay. Plus or minus 1961, 1004, A Book of Salt, A Love Supreme, A New Program for Graphic Design, A Phenomenology of Whiteness, A Room of One's Own, About the Relative Size of Things in the Universe, Alphabetical Africa, Alternative New York, 1965 to 1985. American Prospects, An Anti-Catalog, Annihilation, Are We Human, As Seen, Ask the Ages, Assemblage, Environments, Happenings. At the Mountains of Madness, Berlin, Berlin. Black Mountain, An Exploration in Community. Born. Building for Brussels. Catalog. Conditional Design Workbook. Counterpunch. Crisis in Education. Curating After the Global. Dark Emu. Dawn. Delirious New York. Der Mensch erscheint im Holozän. Der Prozess. Der Ursprung des Kunstwerkes. Design Writing Research. Designing Programs. Die Ausgewanderten. Die Ringe des Saturn. Dispatch. Dissenting Spaces. Draw it with your eyes closed. Dream World and Catastrophe. Dysnomia. Emergent Strategy. Empire of Imagination. Essays on the Blurring of Art and Life. Exhalation. Exhibitions, this one by Klaus Frank. Feelings Are Facts. Fish Story. For the blind man in the dark room looking for the black cat that isn't there. Forms, whole network, whole rhythm hierarchy networks. Frankenstein. Gebrauchsgrafik in der DDR. George Perec, A Life in Words. Geschichten von Ellis Island. Gestalten für die Serie. Oh, and Getting Things Done. Getting Things Done. Well, actually, that's one I have right here. Pretty nice that we landed right on that one. Getting Things Done is actually what started this whole series. I mean, reading David Allen's little self-help management book this summer made me realize I needed to put a little more structure into my life and, in order to really get things done. And so, well, I just happened to be chatting with David the other day. So I may as well open that up and then we can all chat with him, right? What do you think? Let's try that. Let's stop the share and, let's just share a little conversation with David Allen. Okay, we're recording, as it were. Well, thank you, David, for joining from Amsterdam. As you know, over the past month, I've been performing a kind of inventory of my personal tags using the task management software Things, which is based on your best-selling book, Getting Things Done. And so, as I did guiltily admit in the first episode of this series, although my friend Matthew Slotiver recommended it to me over 5 years ago, and I've actually bought it for, a dozen folks, I didn't actually finish the whole book until this summer. So it took me a while to get Getting Things Done, but I eventually did do it, and it's obviously kind of transformed my life. I had this massive impact, and I'm doing this whole series actually inspired by reading your book. So, having you on the show is a real pleasure and an honor. And I wanted to start by just asking you, how did you first develop your personal structure for organizing things?
I've always been a pretty organized guy. As a kid, I was, simply because I'm lazy. Probably one of the laziest people you ever met. I hate redoing anything or having to undo something so I can do something else. So I've always been, somewhat organized in that way. I'm really more of a freedom guy. How do I get rid of distraction? How do I not have to rethink anything, more than once? So I guess it's been just part of my DNA that I would be attracted to things that let me get stuff done with less effort. And I guess probably most of my life I've felt that way. After 35 jobs, by the time I was 35, consultant was the only thing left, consultant or flake. So I took the positive route, ideally. And, but then I've never had, honestly, a formal traditional course in psychology, business, or time management. All my stuff is just street smarts. It's just showed up from experience. And as I started my own consulting practice, I hunted around for people who were in the consulting world to learn what they do. What can I learn from them that I could use, in my processes? And turned out I ran across a guy who became a mentor of mine for a couple of years, still a good friend, many years later. And he had developed some processes basically for organizational change. Organizations that wanted to shift gears, move forward faster, go a different direction or whatever. He had a whole model that worked actually very successfully to help organizations do that. But his first process, I think it was a 6-phase process, his first process was, he called it a communication process, but it's actually just a clearing process. He had discovered years before, in 25 years of doing this work, he had discovered that executives tend to be hung up about decision-making about all kinds of stuff. And it's very hard to get an organization to change if it had a lot of old business still lying around. And a lot of that old business lying around was in people's heads. Stuff they committed to, hadn't finished, things that were grabbing their attention, keeping them from being able to focus clearly and freely toward the future. And so, again, I wasn't broken. So Dean said, he was my guy. He said, David, let me walk you through this process, see what you think. So he had me sit down and literally a big stack of paper and get everything out of my head, everything I had attention on, one at a time on a piece of paper, and throw it into my in tray. I don't know how long it took me, an hour or two or something like that. And then at the end of that, he said, okay, now take that stack, put it back in front of you. Let's go through them one at a time and pick it up and go, what's the next action on that, David? And I had to think for a minute. It's like, well, I guess I need to. Well, he said, well, can you do it in 2 minutes or less? I said, yeah, let's do it. And I did it. If you can't do it in 2 minutes or less, can you delegate it? Yeah, I could delegate that. And he had a little stack of memos, delegation memos. Because back then, this is 1980, 81, 82. There weren't even, well, you can imagine what was around in 1981, 82, if any of you are old enough to remember that. So basically, it was just paper stuff and folders. And then we would write, if I couldn't delegate it, couldn't finish in 2 minutes, then he said, well, so write whatever the next action is, or put it on a yellow sticky note and stick that on the piece of paper, and then stack that up. And at the end of all that, I went, oh my God. Suddenly the space, the clarity, the freedom, the energy that showed up in just going through that process was, I said, that's fascinating. Now, that was just his initial process so that he could clear an executive's head so that they could actually make decisions and not get stuck and hung up, on some key initiatives and other kind of things. But it turned out that process solved so many things just in and of itself. That became a core part of the coaching, and I didn't call it coaching. The consulting I was doing with friends with small businesses and so forth. And I started to use the same kind of process with them, and it produced exactly the same result: more freedom, more focus, more space to think about creative stuff. So I went, well, that's pretty cool. So that became part of my consulting practice. And then, head of human resources in a big corporation saw what I was doing and said, geez, David, we need that in our whole culture. Can you design some sort of a package seminar or training around this methodology you've come up with? So I said, I'll see. So it took a couple of months, designed a 2-day personal productivity seminar training. We did a pilot program for 1,000 executives and managers, and it was successful. Oh my God. I found myself thrust into the corporate training world. I mean, this was Lockheed, 1983, 84. And
wow. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah.
No, I was gonna ask because, before we even got there, I mean, how it seems like this process of clarifying and really processing all of this past things, I mean, has such a relationship also to my understanding of a lot of mindfulness practices or consciousness practices. I mean, did you think about it in those terms when you were first learning it from Dean?
I was doing a lot of consciousness work and a lot of personal growth stuff and all that stuff back then anyway. Sort of avocationally, I was, come on, this is Berkeley, 1968, I was an American intellectual history major in Berkeley, graduate school, 68. So then I was very much involved in a lot of that. it wasn't directly associated with that, but it had a lot to do with that. Because a lot of what I was learning in the personal growth world and my own self-exploration was the power of agreements, the negative price of breaking agreements, the positive price of keeping agreements. And that was just a small piece of a whole sort of personal growth methodology and seminar that I was actually facilitating called Insight Seminars, back in 70, whatever that 78, 79 when we did that. So it had something to do with all of that. But again, I also got a black belt in karate, in martial arts, in my 20s. And there, a lot of the high levels of training there had a lot to do with clearing your head, meditative kind of practices that may have had a spiritual component, but a very practical component. If 4 people jump you in a dark alley, you do not want 2,000 unprocessed emails hanging around your psyche, right? You need to be clear and clear and clear. And so the whole idea of clarity, of space, and the freedom to be present was a very practical thing I learned, 50 years ago. And so the mindfulness people and all, that's all the same thing. It's called being present. The yogis teach that, so all you have to do is focus on your breathing because that brings you present. And so that's a lot of what the training is in the process. And, being able to step outside and realize you're not your mind. And so just watch what your mind is doing. And, all those are good things. That's great stuff. That's not really where my stuff came from, though it has a lot to do with that. I don't care how much mindfulness training you do. If you still need cat food and it pops into your head more than once, then you're not appropriately engaged with your cat, right? So yeah, you can discipline yourself to not be distracted by the things that are potentially distracting to you. But I'm so lazy. Why should I? I'm too lazy to spend time training my thinking. Let me just do the stuff that clears my thinking so I don't have to worry about that. Write cat food on the sticky notes. So whoever's going to the store buys cat food. Done. Right? Appropriate engagement. It's there.
Well, it's funny that you start from the point of saying that actually you're a lazy person, which obviously is not the impression that one gets reading Getting Things Done. It seems like there's an endless set of projects that are, getting sorted through. And I have to say that, one of the things that my wife probably hates the most about the fact that I did Getting Things Done is that I now feel like I'm twice as productive as I was before. And I don't think I was a slouch before, but it seems like a way to actually, improve your productivity rather than a way to be lazier, the way you're framing it, but, or to wallow in that.
Well, come on, all the coolest, wicked, neat stuff that ever shows up in your life was probably created by a lazy person that wanted to get something done with less effort, more class, ease, and elegance. End of story. The last person I'd ever want to read their book about productivity would be somebody who's into working hard.
Well, I mean, that'll probably resonate well because, I do think we have, I'm sure that many of the folks watching this are coming out of art or design or something, and many of them might be saying, well, but creativity doesn't come from structures. Creativity comes from freedom. It comes from liberation. It comes from all these things. But if I'm reading you right, it's almost like those things, to do that, you need to have those structures in place. Well,
there was a guy named Gustave Flaubert, pretty well known, who was fairly significant in creating sort of the model for new fiction, and what was doing. Well, he has a fabulous quote that says, "Be steady and well ordered in your life so you can be fierce and original in your work."
That's
probably
beautiful.
I wish I'd said that, but
I like to say every guru has a guru, so you have to have some teachers too. But on the other hand, like there's a William Blake one that I might be misquoting, but it's something like, I had to make my own system so that I wouldn't be a slave to another person's. I think the original quote is another man's, but
Sure.
I'm trying to ungender it, make it a little more contemporary. But in a way, couldn't somebody have the argument? But David, for people, if I, Prem, am following, Getting Things Done, I'm just submitting myself to somebody else's system rather than developing my own. What do you?
Well, that's like saying, well, gee, if I respond to gravity, I'm responding to some physics that's not mine. Duh. You kind of don't shoot the messenger. It's not a system. It's a systematic approach, right? It's not structure. It's an installed thought process that makes things easier and clarifies the nature of what your agreements are and what your work is. I mean, the late, great Peter Drucker would tell anybody who's a knowledge worker, and a knowledge worker includes anybody who needs to think to decide what to write, what to paint, what to whatever. They're a knowledge worker. And his, admonition was the biggest job you have is defining what your work is. And so that requires thinking. And thinking is hard work. It is. Ask any writer, right? Ask anybody. Oh, come on, how much did you have to think to curate what we just saw at the Steadlight, right? Right. You didn't just wind up spontaneously doing that. There was an awful lot, I'm sure, that went into it. So, anybody who complains about too much structure in GTD is not doing GTD. They're just looking at it and saying, because it's like to tell somebody what it's like to actually get your head clear without any of the distractions that are going on is like trying to tell somebody what chocolate's like if they never ate it. You have to do it. All you have to do is sit down and don't believe me. Just sit down and empty your head, decide the next actions on all the things you got out of your head, and then see how different you feel, how much more creative you have, how much more space you have to focus on the cool stuff you want to focus on. Right? I mean, I'm one of the most, frankly, I'm one of the most spontaneous, follow my intuitive hunches kind of guys you'd ever meet. And when people do meet me, you did meet me. I mean, people go, God, you're not buttoned down and anal retentive like I thought you were going to be. No, I'm not. That's why I came up with GTD. That's like, as I mentioned to you, I think before, do you like the line in the middle of the road? Yeah, absolutely. Why? It's structure. It's a constraint. Oh my God, it's it's tying you down. Yeah, right. But you like to think about other things while you drive instead of people hitting you. So you kind of like just enough structure. Here's 3 of my acrylic paintings I just did last year. I need the frame.
Yeah.
Right. And look at my box of colors, and they're pretty well organized. My brushes are pretty well organized. Ask any artist what they love to do, and then go look at their tools, and you'll see a high degree of organization.
I completely agree. I mean, what I've also really recognized in a lot of the artists I've worked with and talked with over the years is that they have rituals. Like they have ways that they have things they do every day, and that's a structure too. They have kind of ways of either meditating or yoga or moving or even the act of painting or making art or writing. Each of those things is a rhythm.
Right.
So I hear you. I mean, I think that and it obviously jives for me because it's been pretty useful to implement in my life. But I do wonder, one of the things that you mentioned, you were getting, as you were talking about the history of this method and your own consulting work, you mentioned that, your first clients were, impressive, like 1,000-person contracts with, what was it, Lockheed and other places. And but that's, were there folks for whom this didn't work? Were there folks there already where you saw, well, some people have different backgrounds, they have different values, they have different belief systems, they have different rhythms. This just doesn't work for them.
It's because they don't work it. That's all. It works for anybody who works it. Never seen an exception. Never seen anybody sit down and actually do that and go, wow, this is just too much work, the freedom. And I don't like the sense of freedom and control that it gives me. I'd rather just be a crazy nut and be stressed. And frankly, Prem, it's the biggest barrier to entry for people to do this is their addiction to stress.
Can you say
and it's
more
not
about
like
that?
it's not like I got to go shoot up stress. It's your willingness to tolerate ambient anxiety in your life. Mm-hmm. I'm not. And anybody who wants to get rid of ambient anxiety has got to do this. I'm sorry, and don't ask me, ask all the cognitive scientists in the last 10 years who wound up validating what I discovered 35 years ago. Your head's just a crappy office. And anything you're trying to keep just in your head, as soon as you have more than 4 things you're just keeping in there, they have now proven you're going to diminish your cognitive capability. What you want to do with your cognitive capability is up to you. Right? And how much and why you want the freedom. See, you don't need time. One more time. Time for what? How much time does it take to have a good idea? 0. How much time does it take to be creative? 0. How much time does it take to be innovative, strategic, or loving or present? 0. Those require no time whatsoever. And yet most people would call those some of the golden goodies in their life. Being present, being creative, being strategic, being innovative, being loving, whatever. Yeah, those are golden goodies, but you don't need time. What do you need? Room. You need space, right? And if you don't have space, I don't care how much you try to meditate for 2 hours. If you don't have room in your head, those 2 hours are going to be nothing but full of just distractions that you haven't handled appropriately. So I don't know. Again, don't shoot the messenger. And I wasn't out to convince anybody. I was out to share this stuff for anybody who wanted to use it. And by the time I wrote the book, I'd been already 20 plus years in my career doing this with thousands of hours, hundreds of thousands of people going through this training, and literally thousands of hours one-on-one with some of the busiest and brightest and most creative people you'd ever meet, actually walking them through this methodology and watching the results. And only then did I feel confident I could write the book, because you can't punch a hole in it. You can try. People do. Well, it's going to stop my spontaneity. It's going to stop my creativity. It's too much work. Fine. Don't do it. Right? And then see what happens. And I used to call it, what it handles is the problem of overwhelm. Actually, overwhelm handles itself. If your building caught on fire right now, Prem, you'd handle it. It might be fun, but you'd handle it. Yeah. The problem is, if you're not in that kind of a crisis, that kind of real overwhelm, there's a bigger overwhelm that shows up. What's now I refer to as ambient anxiety. It's that weird, vague sense that there's probably more I should be, what could be, but you can't put your finger on it. And that's the demons at the gate that come rushing through when you're not in a crisis. How many things could you do? And it's the stress of opportunity for the most part these days.
Well, I can totally, I can say, just very personally, like I used to have, before July, August, when I read the book, I used to have these moments that I would call my I want to die moment, which were mostly like I would wake up in the middle of the night, or I would be in the morning walking to the studio, and during lockdown, and I would realize I forgot to write this person this email. I never did this thing I was supposed to do. And it would just weigh on me. And I think that when I read Getting Things Done, I had a language for that and a way to say, oh, if that is stored in my external brain and I know I have to write this email to that person tomorrow at 3 p.m., I will do it and I won't worry about it at night. And so, I think that there's something really useful in that. Particularly in these moments of increased stress. Like when I look around the world and reading the news last night about what's happening in the US, and on multiple levels, I was like, there is so much stress. We could all use a little bit more mindfulness and a little more presence these days.
Well, GTD shines in surprise. See, there'll come a point, and I don't know where you are in this, on this scale, Prem, in terms of your maturity with this methodology. At a certain point, if you get surprised and change happens where, oh my God, I suddenly had to do this thing, or I suddenly got sick, or I now had to deal with my mom and whatever, and that's why I fell off the wagon. Yeah. At a certain point, those things will throw you off the wagon. At a certain point, those things throw you on the wagon. Oh my God, this change just happened. Let me sit down, clear my head. What's now got my attention? What are the new projects that have now just shown up because I've got to work from home instead of at the office? What are the new project I've got because my kids are going to be here all day and do kind of virtual training? What am I, yada, yada, yada. If you really get GTD, that's the time this stuff comes to the fore. And I got legions of testimonials of people saying, XYZ happened. Thank God I had GTD under my belt. It allowed me to get back on course, recalibrate, and refocus fast. So it's a martial art.
Yeah. Well, it reminds me, the way you talk about it, it is so interesting. I'm currently reading this book by Resmaa Menakem, who it's called My Grandmother's Hands. He's a Minneapolis-based trauma specialist, therapist, social worker who writes about race and bodies and trauma, but also the history of violence in Europe for the last 500 years and how that produced the idea of whiteness, but how that translated in the aftermath of slavery in America and how it's still in people's bodies. But it's the way you talk about GTD as this kind of almost bodily training, or you might call it a cognitive training, but I think it's also sounds like it's almost in the body. It's a basis that allows you to make decisions from a kind of clearer space, from a place where you've almost like gotten certain things covered, and you know that you're approaching it honestly, directly, rather than with some sort of preformed anxiety or fear.
Well, to make it even simpler than that, pre-pandemic, okay, let's go back before that. When people feel best about their job is a week before their vacation. Because what are they doing a week before their vacation? They think it's because they're going on a vacation they feel so much better. No. What are they doing? They're cleaning up, closing up, clarifying, managing and renegotiating all their agreements so that they can, when they hit the golf ball, they're present, or they can walk on the beach and be present. I just suggest people do it weekly, not annually. But come on, it's the same thing. That's why you can't argue with this. Anybody listening or watching this who keeps a calendar already says your brain can't do it. And so if you keep a calendar, why aren't you keeping everything else out of your head? Try to intellectually justify halfway in between. Either your head's the place for it or not. And to your point, if anybody says, screw system, I say, fine, screw the system. Let God give you the phone number when you show up at the phone. Let all the powers that be remind you of where you need to be at 2:30 tomorrow afternoon. Just go ahead, right? And if you're not doing that, why the hell are you doing that? About all the other stuff. The problem is, if you're halfway in between, some in your head, some in your system, you don't trust either one. That's why a lot of people fall off the system and don't like system. Think about it, because their systems, frankly, are dysfunctional. They're partial and they're incomplete and they're not current. Once it is, then you have a real external brain. You don't want a disabled external brain. That's why if you're not keeping your system current, it is. Does that make sense?
That was me knocking over a glass, but thankfully nothing's broken. Getting too excited about systems.
There was some enlightening.
Well, I mean, I was going to ask. I mean, if you have a couple more minutes.
I got as much time as you want.
Okay, then let me, what I did want to ask is, for you, do you have, GTD is a system that, let's say, I know you by, and maybe a lot of other folks know you by. And you already mentioned some of the people who helped you get to GTD, like Dean Acheson. That's his name, right? Like which was really confusing. I thought, I know
not that Dean Acheson.
I know, I didn't know it was a common name. It's like, who knew Prem Krishnamurthy was a common name, or David Allen? But my question was going to be, are there other systems that you personally subscribe to that, GTD is just one thing, and actually you use the word, I don't know if you use the word approach, but I transpose the word approach or methodology. Like, it's not a fixed thing. It's not a belief system. It's a tool that allows you to develop, any other kind of narrative structure or life structure or set of goals on top of it. But I'm curious for you, do you have other systems that intersect with the GTD system and your own way of living that help you to orient?
Well, if you take GTD in its broadest context, it includes everything. It includes everything from trash to reference material. Do I have any systems that are outside of any of that? No. I got tools. I got my tools. There's my easel and my paintbrushes, and I got my tools. What would not be GTD? Everything is. I have to decide, I got reference material over here. I got a bunch of weird electronic stuff in a strange drawer down there. And all that stuff is that's where those things go. So again, it's how do I approach this stuff? And approaching it could be, what's so cool about this is it shrinks or grows. I use the camera metaphor of the dilating or opening, the opening or closing.
The aperture.
The aperture. Yeah. So this system can go as broad as you want. Listen, I've coached the head of the CTO of a major, financial firm in New York City. He had 140 projects. Right? And so the complexity of his list had to be match the complexity of his life in order for him to sleep well. Right? But we coach 9-year-olds. They don't need a very complex system, but it's the same system. It's the same thing. A 9-year-old, an executive needs to come back from a meeting and empty their briefcase and take the business cards or receipts or the notes they took in the meeting and do something with them. A 9-year-old needs to empty his or her pack at the end of the week and make sure the note gets to mom to sign. Same thing, same process. That's right. That's why you can't shoot a hole in the process. You either want. The funny thing is, we're not born doing this. So even though gravity is there no matter what, this process is something you actually can you have to train yourself to do and get better at and habitualize. That's why I call it a thought process or a systematic approach. Once you learn the approach, I approach anything this way. I don't care what it is. It comes in called, what is that, Catherine? Is that something I need to do? Is that yours? Is that mine? That's GTD. Well, that's clarity. So this is all about clarity and freedom. What do you need to do to get everything off your mind? And you decide. If you find a better way to do it than GTD, let me know, because I will then write that in some next book. But nobody's ever been able to do that. That's why I say you can't punch a hole in it. If you want nothing on your mind, I don't care whether you want that or not. Well, I do. Otherwise, I wouldn't share all this, because I know it's a very cool place to operate from. And the human race is going to be a lot better when people have clearer heads, and feel more confident about themselves and their ability to actually produce things. That's where a lot of the negativity comes from, is people's insecurities and their fears and their lack of self-esteem, quite frankly. And so anything that helps build that confidence of people's ability to be able to complete and create, and that's really what you're here for, is completing and creating, right? You're here to be, you have to be accountable for whatever you've put in motion. That's why this has a lot to do with agreements. And whether that's an agreement you made 10,000 lifetimes ago, or 10 minutes ago, it's going to equally be something you will have to deal with. Now, dealing with it may not be having to finish it. It may be deciding that's not something I'm going to finish, so you dump it, or you put it on someday. Maybe I'll get to that. Or you say that's trash, or that's just reference. I'll refer to that in case I need it. And those are just the decisions we make to help clarify what things are that we've allowed into our psychic ecosystem and even physical ecosystem, to your point.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the points you also made is this question of what you put in motion. And I do think that this structuring of thought processes is really remarkable and scales across different contexts. My question is, to come back to the beginning of GTD in a way to also bring us back into the present moment. What you mentioned, that when you were consulting, you were working with Lockheed, and I think, a lot of your clients have been people in the corporate, commercial, even sometimes military and other kinds of businesses. I'm curious, have you thought about GTD in the context of social transformation, or in terms of thinking about other kinds of ethical changes in cultures, in government, or in the way we live today? You moved from the U.S. to Holland, what, 5 years ago, 6 years ago?
6 years ago, yeah.
6 years ago, and I'm just curious if you might tell me, how do you think about GTD in light of a lot of the crises that the world is facing, social, environmental, political, racial, and how are those tools relevant or not?
Well, my mission, at least materially in this world, is to create a world where there are no problems, only projects. Right? The only time you call something a problem and keep calling it a problem is because you're not actively engaged in either clarifying whether it can be resolved or in resolving it. So, is gravity a problem? Do you wake up this morning, Prem, and go, oh, damn, gravity, it sucks. It's causing body parts to sag, and, it's killing people out there. Oh, geez. No, you don't do that, because you don't assume gravity can be any better. You only complain about the stuff that you think ought to change, should be changed, whatever. You're just not appropriately engaged with making that change. Right. So, yeah, a lot of people in the NGO field, a lot of people in the help the world field, and I do pro bono all the time. I just did a pro bono keynote and Q&A with 250 project and process managers for the municipalities of the Netherlands yesterday. Why? It's my adopted country. I'm going, God, anything they can improve, to make the quality of life here even better than it is, and it's great, relatively speaking. I serve, so I have two prices of my time, retail and free, So I did retail for a bunch, so I had time to do a bunch of free stuff, at the same time. But that's, yeah. So anything that helps change the world's thinking in any way, I don't care who it is, even those people doing, quote, bad things. The reason they're doing bad things is they don't have enough consciousness or enough confidence or enough sense of themselves that, they're willing to play along with those games. So I got the long haul. This is the long game. Right? And I don't know how much, at 75, in December, I don't know how many more miles on my tires I have. And I'm certainly probably not going to have the whole planet change its thought process by the time I check out. I'm just doing the best I can with what's in front of me.
Thank you. No, that's I hear you. I like the distinction between problems and projects, and the idea. I've been accused of being an optimist before, and I look at all of these things happening in the world, and sometimes, not every morning, but most of the time, I wake up thinking, what is it that one can do to move these things along? And I think it's also, it's even why I think I started this whole series was a somewhat quixotic way of saying, maybe if I spend a month taking a look at my own systems and the things I believe and why they are there and really trying to process them, it'll give me some clarity to kind of actually move on to the other things that need to get done apart from working through my past shit. Excuse the thing, which I think we're all doing sometimes, but I'm looking forward to getting to a point where I don't have to work through the old shit and can just focus on the projects ahead that are of relevance to a lot of people.
Well, you'd be surprised at the gold to be mined in the old shit. Somebody cleans their garage, their basement, their attic. That's old shit. But the creative ideas they come up with when they're doing that, oh my God, look, and now we could, oh my God. So don't negate even all the old business stuff. There's gold to be mined there, but you need to start to in order to have that stuff surface. And that's why the weekly review is not a static process in the GTD process. It's a very real and creative process that allows you to start to go through what's happened, what's current reality, and get real about current reality. Come on, you're a current reality guy. I know, I saw your taste, in art and other kinds of things. And, again, I think I mentioned to you earlier when we met, is one of my favorite books is The Antidote by Oliver Burkeman, which is, happiness for people who can't stand positive thinking. But it's really about the willingness and the ability to accept what's going on as opposed to pretend it's not there by some na-na-nu-nu, frou-frou positive thinking. You need to deal with reality the way it really is. GTD doesn't make life easier. If it was easy, you'd never grow or change or expand or express yourself. You just want to appropriately engage with those challenges and the opportunities that are in front of you. And you don't even have to like your life to get it off your mind. Right. But the truth is, once you get everything off your mind, you'll find that there's a lot of things you like that you didn't realize or didn't appreciate before.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about this, and also very helpful as we kind of move through what has been a challenging year so far and promises to be a challenging one to continue, but projects, indeed, not problems. Well, yeah. Thank you so much, David, for your time. I feel like we could talk for hours and hours and hours, and hopefully we will next time I feel comfortable enough coming to Holland. But it's been great, and I can honestly say that I think GTD has obviously made a difference in lots of people's lives, and I do actually hope that even through this program, it reaches a couple of other folks who might be thinking about those problems or projects in the world and how this kind of a methodology for personal clarity, for individual clarity, can scale up to the organizational, to the collective, even to the societal level. Okay, well, there we go. Thanks, David Allen. It's been great chatting with you. Maybe you're even watching here online, and we can be chatting a little bit too. But I wanted to get back to this little last episode. Let's see. Well, sadly, we don't really have time to go through the rest of the references. There's a lot of them, and as I said, I could probably do a little mini lecture on each of them. So, but that's why there's a book, and you know where to find me if you ever want to chat about this stuff. Let's before we close out the section, I just want to go to a really important one, which is collaborators. And I mean, I'm sure that you might have thought, hey, these last 5 episodes of Structure describing a system in real time, they're just about this like one dude, Prem Krishnamurthy, right? But I mean, I've tried to signpost my best as I could throughout that it's really more like this one person, this guy called Prem. I mean, this person is actually an accumulation of a lot of other folks. I mean, people who past, present, and future who have shaped this thinking and this individual. And I mean, a complete list of everybody who has shaped my thinking would be thousands and thousands and thousands long. But what I have here is, let's say, a partial list of the folks whom I'm currently engaged in things with in different projects of different scales and kinds. And, it is a very partial list because, if you're not on the list, but you feel like you should be, don't feel left out. It probably just means that there wasn't something when I was processing this morning that I thought of that I'm working on with you. But who knows? Maybe already by now you are on this list because it's already changed. I mean, it's already been at least a day or so since I recorded this talk, and here it is now. And whenever you're watching this sometime in the future, I'm sure that you might already be on this list. So thank you to everybody with whom I've made these works and continue to make projects in the world. So I just want to send everybody there who's watching this on whatever channel in the wide internet a big hug, virtual hug. I'm going to sign off for now. I think it's time for me to end Structures, but I'm just going to leave us with one more thing, a song, a kind of slow jam to keep us moving together. I mean, I believe that music is one of the most important ways that we commune with each other. So I hope you'll join me for this last song, and feel free to stand up and move your body if the spirit moves you.
Wanted love
Okay, then. Well, thank you everyone for joining these last 5 weeks. It's been great to be with you. I'm wishing you all well. Take care of yourselves, take care of others, and I love you all.